Hello, my name is Cassidy Wallace, and this is going to be a case study presentation of Hurricane Rita, which made landfall in 2005. Overview of Hurricane Rita. Rita was a major hurricane in 2005. It did reach Category 5 status with wind gusts in excess of 140 miles an hour. It caused storm surge up to 15 feet in Louisiana coastal areas, with a death toll of 111. Certain problems faced by emergency managers: mass evacuation and gridlock traffic, which was the cause of most of the death toll, as well as flooding and power outages and overwhelmed communication, which are typical of most hurricanes which make landfall. Timeline of events: September 17th, Rita became a tropical depression off the Turks Islands. 19th, it was classified a tropical storm as it passed through the Bahamas. On September 20th, it did pass 50 miles south of Key West as a Category 2. Once it entered the Gulf of Mexico, it increased from a Category 2 to a 5 in 24 hours, which is very, very fast for a hurricane to build. On the 21st, it did reach Category 5 status, and about 24 hours later, they had a peak intensity of 180 mile per hour winds. September 24th, it weakened to a Category 3 just prior to landfall and remained a tropical storm well into northern Louisiana. Hurricane Rita's predicted track, which, as you can see, was predicted while it was a tropical storm, was supposed to go well into southern Texas, did turn north prior to making landfall. As you can see, Hurricane Rita's complete track, which did turn north sharply prior to making landfall, and you can see it did remain a tropical storm almost into the Arkansas border. The dark red during the Gulf of Mexico shows the time of building to a Category 5 storm. Storm surge, which affected much of the Texas-Louisiana coast. You can see in certain areas it increased to as much as 15 feet above normal sea level. Many areas saw 5 to 10 foot storm surges. This picture on the figure 4 is of Cameron, Louisiana, which saw some of the hardest hit storm surges of 15 feet, and it just demolished the small coastal town. Peak winds were sustained at 100 miles an hour after landfall. Rita did produce 90 tornadoes estimated throughout Texas and Louisiana. Rainfall: Rita was a pretty low rainfall producing storm, producing 5 to 9 inches of rainfall in some areas, with 10 to 15 inches, which is not an excess for a hurricane of that size. However, it was still a significant amount of rainfall. Emergency management preparations: Rita's impacted area was declared a state of emergency on September 23rd. The president did declare it and did activate FEMA, as well as the Texas National Guard and the United States Coast Guard. They did pre-position food and supplies, also gave them some DoD helicopters and aircraft. Groups directly impacted: residents affected by the storm, eastern Texas coastal communities. Louisiana coast was directly impacted the most. Indirect was the mass evacuation of Houston, which was the cause of the death toll. 111 casualties were reported, Only 3 were actually due to the storm impact. Uh, the other casualties were due to the evacuation of the greater Houston area. Difficulties faced during these mass evacuation. The city of Houston officials did not want to recreate a Katrina. When the decision was finally made, it was made slightly late, and residents were encouraged not to stay in the area at all and to completely evacuate. This led to one of the largest evacuations in the history of the United States. About 2.5 to 3 million Houstonians attempted to evacuate. All the Houston highways were gridlocked. Some people were trapped for 12 to 20 hours in excess. 600 people were hospitalized due to heat-related injuries. Majority of deaths were caused to heat, which was a very hot day in Houston that day, as well as 24 were sustained in one incident with a bus catching on fire. As you can see from the figure, this is a picture of gridlock in one of the Houston outbound highways, and these motorists were trapped for several hours. Continued difficulties, flooding and power outages along the impacted area of Texas, Louisiana. Storm surge gauges failed. Shelters became overwhelmed, and communication centers became overwhelmed with incoming phone calls. Special needs patients and nursing home patients didn't have the personnel needed to evacuate them adequately. Financial losses. National Hurricane Center estimated $10 billion in losses throughout the U.S., 5.2 million in insured property, and flood losses equaled 428 million. Financial funding. U.S. Department of Homeland Security gave 451 million. 265 million for emergency protective measures. FEMA also donated 500 million to open 200 shelters. Lessons learned by emergency managers. There was a lack of multi-state emergency planning in effect at this point in time. Officials obtaining data on residents and at-risk employees was lacking. There wasn't enough personnel to successfully evacuate nursing facilities. Lessons learned. Coordinate emergency response better with federal and local governments. Phased evacuations began being planned, as well as managing fuel supplies. This also initiated contraflow for the Houston highways and coastal regions to evacuate in hurricane lanes. Once again, city officials initiated contraflow a little too late during Hurricane Rita. As the figure shows, you can see motorists driving outbound on inbound lanes of the highway. This is standard practice on hurricane evacuations now, but at this time it was not a standard practiced tactic for emergency managers. In conclusion, Hurricane Rita made landfall as a Category 3 major hurricane and created many problems for emergency managers, not just in the storm impact, but in the indirect effects of the storm, which was the mass evacuation and shortage of supplies and manpower. Total financial loss was $10 billion. Solutions. Emergency managers should have done a better job coordinating with local and state governments, and as well as other managers, and had a better evacuation plan for the Houston residents instead of a more panicked tactic of telling everybody to get out now. Furthermore, they needed to obtain more data on nursing facilities and ensure they had the personnel to evacuate those facilities. List of references. Thank you very much for for listening. My name is Cassidy Wallace, and this has been a case study of Hurricane Rita.